Conspiracy theories are most often a smokescreen to divert us from the true evil.
My dad was right. This family's money is dirty.
Imagination is far more fascinating than reality.
Welcome to Working for Uncle Henry, the podcast. I'm the series author and your narrator, Angela Mullins. In this final episode, we find out what Henry is really up to. Chapter 31. Henry summoned Parker to his office to share the news of Zachary's death. A subtle sense of relief seeped through Parker's being. What happened?
I'm not exactly sure yet.
Well, how'd you find out?
Jennifer.
Parker's eyes shot wide open. Jennifer was with him?
Evidently.
Henry's non-telling answers were taking its toll on Parker. You mentioned you thought Zachary might be trying to get to you through her. Why? What did he want from you? And don't say it was about a museum exhibit.
I didn't say that before. You did. But it is related. I think it's safe to say he's been playing games with us all along.
Parker tilted his head questioningly.
You said yourself the whole Paris thing seemed too easy. How you managed to follow Zachary to Paris, then the warehouse, then escape his capture. He's far more intelligent than that. He was trying to get my attention.
But why? Henry gazed into space studiously for several moments before answering.
He wanted something he thinks I have. Something he believes possesses great power, or at least the illusion.
Like an object? Parker asked after much consideration, then added dubiously, a powerful supernatural object? His question was rife with skepticism, of which Henry ignored.
An object, yes. It matters not whether it actually possesses power. Pure propaganda can generate enough power to sway the masses. Hitler was all about acquiring artifacts, especially those rumored to have supernatural powers. The quest began the moment he took power. For 12 years, he scoured Europe and beyond, searching for the Holy Grail, the Lance of Meritus, or Spear of Destiny, as some call it, and even secret portals in Antarctica. Some believe he found them all.
I remember reading General Patton found the spear and wanted to bring it back with him. Parker was proud to share a bit of his own knowledge. Henry chuckled.
Eisenhower wouldn't let him, or so the story goes. Most people believe the spear is back in the museum in Versailles.
Are you saying it isn't? Henry went quiet. It wouldn't be appropriate to share all the family secrets yet. Perhaps he had said too much already. He picked up his pipe and began packing it with tobacco.
There was a rumor the Nazis made a copy and left it behind for the Allied forces to find.
So did Zachary think you have the real spear? And it has supernatural power? Why on earth would he think that? How would you have gotten it? At an antique sale? Henry took a deep breath and weighed his answer.
Your grandfather acquired a few souvenirs after the war.
What kind of souvenirs? Henry turned back to pacing circles behind his desk.
There were items whose rightful owners were missing or dead, and artifacts best kept away from men who could misuse them. If the spear was placed back in the museum, it could be stolen again by another Hitler. He felt it should be hidden away. Leave the fake in the museum.
But if its power was all in people's heads, does it matter if the spear is real or not?
Of course it matters. The power of suggestion can be precarious in its own right. Enough to cause chaos.
He paused his pacing for a moment.
Are you familiar with the chaos theory, also known as the butterfly effect?
Parker shook his head. Here we go again. More scientific hoo-ha.
It's a mathematical theory, but then everything is based on numbers. In its simplest form, it's about how the small, insignificant things can initiate unpredictable results on a larger scale. For example, a butterfly flutters on one side of the world and causes a storm on the other side. It explains how society can swing in a direction or opinion one would never have imagined just a few years ago. The cause which we fail to recognize or anticipate in those insignificant little events. That's what will usher in the 666 man.
Parker sat up straight. The what?
Think about it.
Parker pondered his uncle's words. Was he talking about... Could he be referring to... Henry continued.
Because of the unpredictability factor in the theory, one can't choose a particular small event to gain a certain result. Zachary's modus operandi was to create numerous small events, often through social propaganda, otherwise known today as fake news. All he needed to do was create chaos. Then he swoops in and saves the day, somehow.
Well, what does that have to do with the Antichrist?
What is needed for someone to control the world?
Parker shook his head to gather his thoughts.
Weapons?
Henry grunted with annoyance.
How does one control weapons all over the world?
He spread his arms wide to illustrate.
Remote access?
Computers?
Communications, to be precise. And communication has changed dramatically through technology. For the first 2,000 years of modern history, man moved about in horse and buggy. Then, just 70 years later, he was flying in the sky all the way to the moon. Technology has advanced leaps and bounds in the last century, and technology is the key ingredient to bring about the end of the world as we know it today. The only thing missing is the right man to step into the picture and harness the technology for his purpose.
Henry sat down at his desk and propped his hands in prayer position with his index fingers extended.
Imagine a world where they've discovered a cure and prevention for cancer, HIV, and other terrible diseases. Perhaps one cure for all those things, in the form of, shall we say, a DNA-altering injection. So altering that the person is no longer 100% human. They will become transhuman. You know, the mark of the beast referred to in Revelation may not just be a tattoo or chip someone gets, thinking they can have it removed later. This DNA altering will be irreversible. But suffering people won't care or even comprehend what the DNA altering really means. They'll only think about being well again. The pains and illness gone.
Henry held up his index finger.
That desire to be well again will outweigh everything else for many people. Everything. More than you can imagine will be willing to reject God to get it.
And you think that's how he'll get people to follow him?
One of many ways. It's like this. If a person stays in the dark long enough, his sight adjusts and he no longer realizes he's in the dark. He thinks he can see. We already live in a selfish society, and it will only get worse as the atrophy of mankind progresses and the world we live in becomes darker. They'll follow him, just the way little children follow a stranger because he offers them candy, even after his peaceful nature turns sinister. Some event will transpire that will jettison its reason for violence. Hermann Göring said, voice or no voice, the people can always be brought to the bidding of the leaders. That is easy. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked. It could be an alien invasion or the appearance of one, but whatever happens, it will foster anger, and anger is a dangerous platform. It fueled Hitler's rise to power. Had the German people not been so humiliated after the First World War, they would perhaps never have followed him. But his anger festered in the people, and they came to love him.
So you think Zachary was going to be another Hitler?
At the time of the war, many people thought Hitler was a 666 man. His foulness to the Jews certainly persisted that belief. I've always been of the notion that Himmler was the more dangerous one because of his deep-rooted occultism. If Hitler had been the 666 man, Himmler would have been the false prophet, the religious leader. But they weren't, were they? They were too early. Not enough things in place yet. As technologically advanced as the Nazis were, it wasn't enough. But now, perhaps it is. Everything predicted to happen in the end times is possible now. But it's over now, right? Now that Zachary's dead? There was still considerable doubt in his voice about Henry's theory. Henry shook his head. There'll be others. There will always be others. What do you mean? Zachary's not the first I've stopped. But I'm an old man now. I can't do this on my own anymore. You are the perfect person to carry on. I need you with me, Parker. You're my heir. This will all be yours one day. Parker's jaw dropped. Carry on? Carry on what? Preventing others like Zachary from trying to become the 666 man. Too many people die in their quest. We need to stop the wrong ones and leave the way open for the right person. What? Parker's shock turned to horror. I don't believe in fighting the inevitable, Parker. Certain things are going to happen no matter how hard we fight them. They must happen. I'm more about helping them along to get to the end sooner. So you want to help the Antichrist? The real one? What kind of person does that? Henry sighed and slumped down in his chair. He studied his pipe and twiddled it in his hand. The kind of man that wants it all to end the way it's supposed to. Why, I think God can take care of that by himself. Henry's pale blue eyes narrowed. Yes, Parker, he can. He can take care of everything all by himself. He doesn't need us for anything. Throughout history, God has never needed man's help, but he chooses to use people to accomplish his missions. He looked away. Sorrow consumed his face. And this is mine. He turned back to Parker. It was God's will for those assets from the war to end up with our family. We're doing good with it. Ultimately, they will be used to protect the Jewish people when the time comes. They already are, for that matter. Every time man starts getting ahead of God's timeline, getting things out of order, putting the cart before the horse. For example, the 6-Day War, that war was way ahead of its appointed time. God had to stop it and stop it quickly. So he used supernatural means to do so. You know how many miraculous stories occurred during that 6 days? Yes, sir, I've heard a few. And the Nazis, they had to be stopped. God used lots of sources to stop that. My father, your grandfather, was one of them, even though he didn't realize it at the time. Now God is using me and you, if you're willing. Parker shook his head and paced in a circle. No, this is crazy. But it's why you're here, Parker, instead of teaching history at a small town high school. I know your intentions were good, but I had to step in. There's a greater need for you here. What do you mean you had to step in? Did you have something to do with me being fired? Henry took several puffs from his pipe, then looked Parker squarely in the eyes. Yes. Parker hung his head in disgust and jumped up from his seat. He stared sternly at his uncle. You mean you orchestrated me losing my job, coming here, staying here, running your dangerous errands, all for some crazy theory of helping the Antichrist? No, I won't be part of this. Parker stormed out and slammed the study door so hard the walls shook, just enough to rattle the pictures on them.
Henry headed out to his garden for solace. He ambled along mournfully, trying to gather his thoughts on how to reconcile with Parker. The array of colors and aromatics brought him a sense of calmness nothing else seemed to do. The beautiful purples and whites of the fall crocus, the crepe myrtles and yellow strips hanging from the witch hazels overhead. He breathed in their spicy scent, and the eucalyptus tree that smell always reminded him, oddly enough, of pecan pie. Parker was flirting with pacing a hole in the area rug of his bedroom. This was madness. Maybe Jennifer was right about him enjoying the adventures of working for Uncle Henry, but this was too much. He was not going to help Henry help the Antichrist. That was sheer insanity. He walked to his closet and began pulling out clothes. A folded brochure fell to the floor. He picked it up. It was the missionary's newsletter he had picked up at church. He smiled. Yes, he will take the trust fund money set aside for him, and he would do good with it. Henry's encrypted phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his sensual journey of the garden. This time it was Carlyle, having arrived at the warehouse where Jennifer had called from.
"I have disturbing news, Colonel,"
he said grimly.
"There's nobody here."
He paused for a reply, but then continued.
"There's a good bit of blood on the floor. I'll take a sample and test it. But we've searched high and low. There's no sign of Zachary. A witness saw a female go in just after Miss Vincini left. There's no sign of her either."
He paused again. Again, Henry gave no response.
"What would you like me to do?"
Henry tapped the tip of his pipe on his teeth. Following a heavy sigh, he replied,
"Find Vincent."
Shoving his sail back into his pants pocket, he marched through the garden toward the front yard just in time to see Parker, on his bike, with all his bags strapped on, zip out the front gate. Sorry to leave you hanging with so many questions, but you'll find the details, although a bit sketchy, on how the Archer family acquired certain Nazi artifacts and their wealth in Book 2 of this series. The fictional biography of Samuel Archer is a prequel that tells the story of the family patriarch. Book 3 of the series, entitled Bad Vibrations, reveals where Parker ends up and continues the story. You'll find links to all the books in the show notes. Well, in case you haven't guessed, I'm a history buff. It was always my favorite subject in school, and probably the most fascinating time in modern history, anyway, is World War II. If you think it was just a war, I encourage you to check out some of the other podcasts I've linked to in the show notes to learn more about it. Thanks for listening to Working for Uncle Henry, the podcast. We'll take a break, start working on Book 4, then start Season 2 of the podcast. I hope you'll join me.